Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for joining us. Well, the November 7 election is fast approaching. We're going to chat about that and more following these words.
Welcome to the fast-paced and unrehearsed weekly discussion featuring the leaders who help shape your world. Join us as we address the issues that impact you each and every day. This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Well, we have a number of important topics to talk about on this week's Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And joining me to do that are three reporters who are covering many aspects of the state's government and politics. Jan Murphy, Capitol reporter with PennLive Patriot News. Tom Lehman, the Capitol reporter with WGAL. And Stephen Caruso, the Capitol reporter with Spotlight PA. All right, Stephen, I want to start with you. I'll tell you, this is often called the long ballot. This is the election that has all kind of references made to it, about the date, about the year. But the fact of the matter is, this odd year, notice I didn't say off year, this odd year election has many important aspects to it.
Yeah, as you said, every year in Pennsylvania is an election year. So when voters go and get their ballots, they're going to see county commissioners, school boards, township supervisors, city council, maybe their mayor, but most importantly, they're going to see judges. And we're going to be talking a lot about that because at the top of the ticket are two candidates for the state Supreme Court, Republican Carolyn Carluccio and Democrat Daniel McCaffrey. McCaffrey is a Philadelphia judge who's now on the state Superior Court, one of the appeals courts, and Carluccio is a judge on Montgomery County Common Pleas Court, and they are fighting it out for a really important seat on the state Supreme Court, which gets to rule on a ton of important topics. We're talking elections, abortion, natural gas policy, like energy policy. Lots of things are going before them, and it's important that voters are paying attention to that.
And what's fascinating about this is the fact that these are important elections, but the turnout tends to be the lowest of any of the election cycles, election cycle years.
Sure, and I think when you're talking about election years like this, you don't have governor on the ballot. You don't have some of the other races that you occasionally will see. You also don't have the presidential race this year. That's going to be next year. So I think it'll be interesting to see some of the trends that we might see. I know that a lot of people have speculated perhaps we might see a little bit more even of a gap between Republicans and Democrats, particularly on the statewide level. But, the interesting thing to me will be to see the turnout, because after seeing all this great turnout in 2022 and 2020, it'll be interesting to see how voters come back a year later ahead of a big election like what we're expecting next year.
And it's important that people come out. I mean, I know the judge races are clearly important, but also these local races that are up, I mean, they're the people that are in positions that can impact your daily life. I mean, whether or not a park gets built in your township, whether or not a housing development goes in or some controversial development. I mean, and with school boards, you have the book bans are certainly a hot topic and that kind of thing. So, I mean, I think those local races are just as important for people to come out and have their voice heard.
I mean, look, these local officials control individual lives to a great extent. I mean, you're right in the community where it's police protection, it's what goes on in the neighborhood, it's what goes on in the schools. I mean, it seems to me that's an extraordinary responsibility.
Yeah, all politics is local is the old saying, but I think it's pretty true. I mean, when you hit a pothole, that's not the president's fault. That's probably just because of, maybe a local, your local city just hasn't been getting out to it. It doesn't mean, they're all bums. It just means it's a reason to pay attention to what is happening on that level.
All right, we're going to run to a break. When we come back, I want to talk about turnout. And how about this, mail-in ballots? There's been a lot of press about mail-in voting and how's that going, and are the local election officials going to be able to deal with them? They say they're very confident that they can deal with them much better than they did in the past. We'll get to that and more following these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Pennsylvania Newsmakers, the pre-election show that's coming up on the 7th of this month. All right, let's go to Tom Lehman. Turnout, it could be, will go up in certain areas if there are issues that predominate, issues that reach people directly in their neighborhoods in which they live. But overall, this has the lowest turnout of any of the election cycles.
Yeah, when you look at the statewide races and you look at what is also on the ballot, you're right. There's a few issues that might be important to a particular voter that lives in a particular township or county or school district. That might drive out some higher local turnout. But when you look at the general statewide election results and you look at how many people end up voting in these races, it's a fraction of what you see during a presidential year.
Something like 25–30% of turnout. That's what comes to mind here.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot lower. And when you're talking about those local races, that's going to matter in terms of who ends up getting elected. You have some close races. Statewide, it might be a larger margin, but it could be close in some places, again, depending on what's driving people out to the polls.
All right, Jim Murphy, there's been a lot of conversation about mail-in ballots, the deadlines, whether they're handled properly. Bring us up to date.
Well, if you didn't already apply for your mail-in ballot, it's too late. But if you did, it's important to get it into the County Board of Elections. The deadline is 8 p.m. on election day. It has to be there. So I know the Secretary of State says at this point, don't mail it, hand deliver it to that county office or in a drop box if your county has that. But the one thing that is important for people to know is that the ballot has to be enclosed in the secrecy envelope that you send back, that otherwise your vote doesn't count. Yep. And the Secretary of State also said that while it's still up to the counties whether or not they allow ballot curing, if you forget to sign the declaration statement or put the date, that it's up to the counties to decide whether or not they have to, if they can call the voter in to fix that. But
and that's been a subject of big debate.
It's a subject, of course,
because some counties have sent contacted the voter and say, you didn't sign the outer envelope or you didn't date the outer envelope. Well, other counties have not done that, and therefore their votes haven't counted.
Yeah, and I mean, this is why those court races matter so much. In Pennsylvania, we're one of a handful of states that elects judges in partisan elections, and those judges then, once they're on the bench, they're the ones deciding, like, does that vote count or not? And it might be at the local level in your county, or it could be a challenge that goes all the way to the state Supreme Court. So, it's important to, looking at these judicial races, I think we're all aware of how powerful the courts can be looking at the U.S. Supreme Court, but your state courts are just as powerful, and you actually have a say in them in Pennsylvania. There are people who will go back and forth about whether we should elect them, whether we should appoint them, but right now you get to elect them. So, and they'd be the ones deciding potentially, does that vote, does that my vote count if I didn't sign it?
Yeah, most of the reporting that I've seen on this indicates that the counties are much better prepared, particularly to count them, and they have experience in it now, so that there aren't big delays.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, the one thing the legislature seems to do to counties is they want to change the rules right before an election, and then county officials are scrambling to try to get everyone educated about this is how we do it. But fortunately, they were cut a break this time. There was no massive changes in our election laws, and so I think that the counties will be more prepared this election.
All right, we're going to run to a break. When we come back, I do want to get into a couple other issues. One would be the legalization of marijuana, and the other one has to do with funding for the state-related schools. I'm talking now about Pitt, Penn State, Temple, and Lincoln universities, and you know, obviously something like 70,000 students. We're talking about a huge number of people. We'll get to that after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Cross-State Credit Union Association. Credit unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, go to ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
Legalizing marijuana in the state of Pennsylvania has been a controversial issue for some time, but it's been an issue subject to debate for some time as well. All right, I want to return to Jan Murphy here. Let's talk a little bit about this subject of legalizing marijuana.
Well, let's be clear, we're talking about legalizing recreational adult use marijuana. We already have medical marijuana legalized in Pennsylvania, but yeah, the House on Wednesday started its look at, okay, it's inevitable, in the Democrats' mind, it's inevitable that Pennsylvania will legalize recreational use marijuana at some point. I mean, on Tuesday, Ohio voters are deciding whether or not to legalize it in their state. So that'll leave everybody but West Virginia around Pennsylvania having legalized recreational marijuana. And so the Democrats, I think, you know, if that's their view, wisely, they're saying, okay, if it's coming, let's figure out the best way to implement a program. And so they started having their, you know, first ever for the State House of Representatives to have hearings on this subject. The Senate dove into it a little bit last session. It's still, you know, there's still some major convincing that has to happen. I mean, there's leaders in the Senate Republicans who are adamantly opposed to it. So, you know, but we're starting the conversation, and it is controversial, though.
Tom, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I think the one thing to watch is going to be whether or not we see a vote perhaps next year on legalization of marijuana in the State House of Representatives, which would be huge. I mean, as far as this particular issue and the movement that you have seen, again, Jan was saying a lot of people see it as inevitable. I spoke with Dan Frankel, who chairs the House Health Committee, after the meeting on Wednesday, and he said, listen, we're going to have some more hearings, but we're moving toward this. And in all likelihood, 2024, we may see an actual floor vote, perhaps, on this particular topic. But yeah, there's a lot of people that have to be convinced, and you've got that Senate Republican caucus that is not necessarily on board here.
Well, one of the concerns that I keep hearing about and reading about is that it's a gateway drug to, you know, heroin, to other drugs, fentanyl that, you know, are more.
Yesterday, an expert on it said he debunked that. He said that's not the case. And they had this expert in data analytics talk about, and I thought her data was fascinating, that most people use it just to unwind. It's not for a gateway drug, and her statistics also showed that it's not like people are using marijuana and then running out and creating chaos. They're just basically sitting back and watching TV
and falling asleep,
eating. You know, it's like, you know, it's not. And so, I mean, she really cast an interesting picture on the.
Well, this is not a new issue.
No, it's been going on for a very long time, and you know, speaking with one member of the House Cannabis Caucus yesterday, you know, to the point about other drugs, he said, listen, the state's been involved in selling drugs, so to speak, in a way with alcohol for a very long time. And his point was, we need to have sort of the moral equivalency of talking about one and the other if we're going to look at this. You know, it's a complex topic, but I think a lot of people are ready to talk about it going forward.
Yeah, there's another aspect of it. Someone who spent most of his career working with college students, the last thing I wanted to see was a career wrecked because of an arrest for a small amount of marijuana.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting too. Like, one thing that we've seen, and I think in the General Assembly, even among Republicans, has been an acknowledgement that, okay, legalization is one thing, but decriminalization. A decriminalization bill moved in the House, I think, a couple years ago. It didn't pass the Senate, it didn't move there, but I think a lot of people also have that mindset of like, okay, like, we can go back and forth about the complicated nature of building a whole new market for a substance that some people think should be illegal. But I think there is a widespread belief, even among DAs in Republican counties or Republican areas, that like we probably should be prosecuting people for possession of a plant that at this point is people can legally buy in almost a lot of our neighboring states.
Right. Yeah, I mean, so what's going to happen? I'll start with you. What's going to happen? Is it going to get through?
That's a really good question. I don't have a crystal ball, but I would imagine. I'd imagine House Democrats are going to take a first stab at it next year, from what I'm hearing.
And how about Governor Shapiro?
Oh, he supports it. The big obstacle is getting it through the Senate Republicans. Just to present the view of the folks who are opposed to it. I mean, yesterday I felt like what I mostly heard is their concern about young people having access to it, people under 21, and how the cannabis industry seems to have advertising that makes it look appealing to young people. That'll be, instead of Kit Kats, it's something else. It's not called Kit Kats, but it's something that's related, and it is induced. It has marijuana-induced candy and gummies and all that stuff. And so that's I think the overwhelming concern of what I heard yesterday.
Well, this issue has been percolating around now for some time. This is not a new issue, and many of the arguments that you hear have been used both for and against it for a considerable period of time. All right, we're going to talk about the higher education funding and more, and we'll do that after this break.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine.
All right, I must qualify what I said. There are about 100,000 students at the 4 state-related institutions who come from our state, that is Pennsylvania. All right, let's go to you, Stephen. A big decision was made about funding the state-related schools.
Yeah, so the Pennsylvania House this week, after months of there being a partisan gridlock over this issue, passed a bill that gives $642 million to, as you said, Penn State, Pitt, Lincoln, and Temple. This is a big step because that money had kind of been in limbo. It was approved in the budget that Josh Shapiro signed in August, but basically, due to a weird constitutional provision, you need to get 2/3 of a chamber to agree to fund those schools. And that was a high bar that conservative Republicans in the House had refused to back because of their opposition to some culture war issues they've seen the schools involved in, or related health systems. We're talking about healthcare for trans people, fetal tissue research, and also Republican leadership has been saying, well, these schools also just are not being accountable to us. So we saw this week the House actually did approve a bill to expand the amount of information those 4 schools have to release, more salary information, more contracts, minutes from their Board of Trustees meetings. And they also added in to this funding bill a rider saying that the schools cannot have to cap tuition, like they can't. It's a tuition freeze.
Next year.
Next year, right.
So the bill passed, and it also, I should say, includes more money for the schools than was approved in the budget Josh Shapiro signed. So that seemed to be trying to sweeten the pot a little bit. But at least one school, Penn State, came out really hard against the tuition freeze for next year, saying that infringes upon their Board of Trustees' authority to set rates. They're the only schools that commented. Pitt, Temple, and Lincoln all have been quieter, but the bill's now in the Senate, and we'll have to see what they do. They already had noted, though, that 7% increase for the schools that is in the bill, it's about a $40 million gap, is something they're taking a look at because it doesn't align with the budget that already passed.
Yeah.
I just thought it was interesting, kind of remarkable. The House GOP has been grappling with their new reality as the minority party in the House, and this was one area where a certain number of their membership was able to bring a particular political issue to a screeching halt in order to get some concessions. And when you look at the dynamics in the Senate, when you look at the new dynamics in the House, I thought that was just interesting that, because they needed that supermajority and they needed those votes, the House GOP was able to get concessions.
Politically, those four institutions, have considerable clout in the legislature. I mean, look at the size and the significance of these institutions. That makes a huge difference, I think.
Yeah, and the one thing to remember that is in exchange for this state funding, these universities give an in-state student tuition discount.
Tuition discount, right.
And it's a sizable one. And I think that Pennsylvania students appreciate that. But yeah, this one of the problems with this tuition freeze for next year is there's no guarantee that they're going to get more state funding, any state funding next year. And that's why I think it's a hard decision for these state relateds to swallow this. Okay,
sure.
Because Pitt did come out and say, okay, next year we will freeze tuition, but we need a 9% increase in our state funding.
And there's also a precedent being set, right?
Yeah, but the other thing one thing that's been left out of this discussion on state relateds is the Senate also has indicated they want the state system universities to freeze tuition. They've froze it now for 4 or 5 years. Yeah. They want to freeze it next year too. So I mean, this is not just targeted at state relateds, but it's this legislature is really trying to get a grip on the cost of higher education in Pennsylvania.
All right, we have a couple minutes left. I'm going to stay with you. Cost of living increase for retirees. What's that about? Well,
this is something that the House is expected to take up when they return on November 13th. And this is an issue that folks who retired before 2000 or July 1st, 2002, which was the last time that they got a COLA, they would be eligible for a bump, $150 some dollars, and maybe $200 more a month in their monthly pension. And this is, honestly, this is something these retirees, a lot of them are in their 80s and 90s. I mean, they're saying we've been going 21 years with just this increase. On the opposite side, you have people saying, well, they got Social Security increases. When they took their job, there was no written guarantee that they would see cost of living increases. But the retirees are like, well, since 1967, it's like every 3 or 4 or 5 years you get a COLA. It's been 21 years that we haven't seen an increase.
So what do you think is going to happen? Anybody want to venture an opinion?
On the legislature? I mean, I guess it seems like the budget's starting to slowly piecemeal advance. We saw some state-related stuff. We've seen a few small ministerial changes. Seems like everyone's starting to talk more. I'm sensing a little more optimism. We'll see.
You do?
I think the ice is thawing a little bit.
Yeah. Well, look, I want to thank you for coming in. We've covered a lot of ground, and obviously the importance of the election on November 7th. Get out to vote. All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And you all stay well and vote.